They handed me divorce papers on a stage, in front of 200 people who came to celebrate 40 years of my life's work. My own children clapped. I signed the papers with a smile, leaned into my husband's ear, and whispered 4 words that I would spend the next 30 days making true. This is that story told exactly the way I lived it. If you're the kind of person who believes quiet women are the most dangerous ones in the room, hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one and I want to know who's sitting with me for this. Now let me take you back to the night it all began. My name is Nancy. I'm 62 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed I understood the shape of my own life. I had worked as a senior claims administrator for the same insurance company for 31 years. I had raised 2 children in a house I helped pay for. I had been married for 36 years to a man named Craig, a man I met when I was 24 and thought I would grow old with in the ordinary, unremarkable way most people hope for. I am telling you all of this because you need to understand what I had, so you can understand what it meant to lose it in front of everyone I loved, on the one night that was supposed to be mine. The retirement party was Craig's idea. He said I deserved a real send-off. 31 years doesn't happen twice. He booked the banquet room at the Whitfield Hotel downtown, the same place we'd had our 5th anniversary dinner decades earlier. He said he wanted it to be perfect. Looking back now, I understand he meant something very different by perfect than I did. My daughter flew in from 3 states away. My son drove up with his wife and my 2 grandchildren, who wore matching cardigans I'd knitted them for Christmas. My coworkers came, my old supervisor came. Even my next-door neighbor of 20 years came with a bottle of wine and a card that said "Congratulations on your new chapter." I remember standing at the entrance of that banquet room in a navy dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, feeling, for maybe the first time in years, entirely proud of myself. Not proud of what I'd done for other people. Proud of what I had built on my own with my own 2 hands across 3 decades of showing up when I didn't feel like it. Craig gave a toast around 8:30. He stood up with a glass of champagne, tapped it with a spoon, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when someone important is about to speak. He talked about how hard I'd worked, how patient I'd been, how proud he was to call me his wife. People clapped. My daughter had tears in her eyes. I remember thinking, this is it, this is the night, this is the reward for 31 years of getting up at 6 in the morning, even when my knees ached and my back hurt and I didn't want to go anywhere at all. Then he asked me to come stand next to him for a surprise. I want you to picture this with me because I need you to feel it the way I felt it. I walked up in my navy dress, smiling at everyone, waving a little the way you do when 200 pairs of eyes are on you. Craig reached under the podium and pulled out a manila folder. For half a second I thought it was some kind of gag gift, a joke photo album maybe, something about retirement being the beginning of the golden years. Instead, he opened it, turned it toward me, and I saw the words at the top of the page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He had a pen ready. He held it out to me like he was handing me a commemorative certificate. He said, in front of everyone, in that same warm toast-giving voice, "I think it's time we both moved on to our next chapter." Separately, I have relived that moment more times than I can count, and I still cannot fully explain the sound the room made. It wasn't gasping exactly. It was worse than that. It was the sound of 200 people trying to figure out whether they had just witnessed something horrifying or something they weren't supposed to understand yet. And then I heard clapping. Not from everyone, but from somewhere near the front tables, where my children were sitting. My son and daughter were clapping. I found out later, much later, after I'd had time to piece it together from receipts and phone records and one very expensive private investigator named Ruth Calloway, who I will tell you about shortly, that this had not been a spontaneous decision. Craig had been planning this for the better part of a year. My retirement meant my pension would fully vest. It meant the house, which I had paid into for 3 decades, would be considered a joint marital asset at its highest possible value the moment my working income stopped and my retirement benefits kicked in. It meant, in the coldest possible legal sense, that this was the single most profitable moment in our entire marriage for him to leave me. And my children, my own son and daughter, had known. They hadn't just known. They had helped him plan it. My son, it turned out, had been dating a woman for 2 years whose father happened to be a divorce attorney with a reputation for representing husbands in what people in that world politely call asset optimization. My daughter had been the one who suggested the retirement party as the venue, because, and I am quoting the text message Ruth found later, she She won't make a scene in front of everyone, she never does. She won't make a scene. That's what my own daughter thought of me after 31 years of packing her lunches and sitting through every soccer game and co-signing her first apartment lease. She thought I was a woman who would simply absorb humiliation quietly because that was easier for everyone else. So here is what I did, and I want you to understand this was not calculated in that moment. It was pure cold instinct, the kind that comes from somewhere older than thought. I took the pen from Craig's hand. I looked at that petition. And I signed it. Right there in front of everyone, without a single tear, without asking for time, without so much as raising my voice. Then I leaned close to him, close enough that only he could hear me, and I said, "You'll regret this." I smiled. I thanked everyone for coming. I picked up my purse and I walked out of that banquet room with my head high in my navy dress, while 200 people sat in absolute silence behind me. If you've ever had someone try to humiliate you in a room full of witnesses, thinking your dignity would keep you quiet, comment below and tell me, because I promise you what happened over the next 30 days is going to feel like justice you can taste. But first, let me tell you what those 4 words actually meant, because they weren't a threat. They were a plan I built in real time. Standing in a hotel parking lot at 9:40 on a Tuesday night, calmer than I had been in years. Here is the thing nobody in that room understood about me, including, apparently, the man I had been married to for 36 years and the 2 children I had raised. I did not spend 31 years as a senior claims administrator by accident. My entire career had been built on one skill: finding the exact place where a contract, a policy, or an agreement did not say what people assumed it said. I had spent decades reading fine print for a living. I had built entire departments around catching the discrepancies other people missed. And Craig, God love his overconfidence, had never once in 36 years thought to ask me to actually review any of our shared financial documents, because he assumed, like everyone in that banquet room assumed, that I was simply the quiet, agreeable wife who nodded along. The first thing I did the very next morning was call my old college roommate, a woman named Linda who had spent her career as a forensic accountant before retiring 2 years ahead of me. Linda picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened. There was a long pause, and then she said something I will never forget. "Nancy, tell me you didn't actually agree to anything beyond signing that he'd like to divorce you." I hadn't. I had signed his petition to initiate proceedings. I had not signed a single financial disclosure, a single asset agreement, a single settlement term. In the state where we lived, that signature meant almost nothing beyond confirming I acknowledged the filing. Craig, in his rush to humiliate me publicly, had skipped every step that actually mattered legally. He had performed a moment of theater and mistaken it for a victory. Linda referred me to a divorce attorney she trusted completely, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Coleman who had spent 15 years specializing in cases involving hidden or undervalued marital assets. I sat in her office 2 days later with a folder of my own 31 years of pay stubs, every contribution statement from my pension, every joint account statement I could access, and a memory sharpened by decades of professional pattern recognition, of every strange withdrawal and every business trip Craig had taken over the past 18 months that I had never questioned because I trusted him. Miss Coleman listened to the whole story without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "He filed for divorce at your retirement party in front of 200 witnesses, including people who likely work in his industry. Nancy, he handed you the easiest hostile witness case I've had in a decade." That was the moment I understood exactly what those 30 days were going to become. I hired Ruth Calloway, the private investigator Miss Coleman recommended, not out of paranoia but out of pattern recognition. In my 31 years reviewing claims, I had learned that when someone is careless enough to blindside you publicly, they are almost always careless somewhere else too. Ruth confirmed it within 9 days. Craig had, in fact, been transferring money, small amounts at first, then larger ones over the past year, into an account connected to a woman he'd been seeing, a former colleague from a conference he'd attended 18 months earlier. He had also, and this is the detail that made even Ms. Coleman raise her eyebrows, used joint marital funds to make a down payment on a condo he intended to move into after the divorce was finalized, believing the timing would let him claim it as separate property acquired post-separation. It was not, as it turned out, going to work that way. Not with 31 years of pension contributions on the table, not with a forensic accountant who could trace every dollar, and not with an attorney who now had motive, timeline, and documentation all lined up like dominoes. But the money was only part of it. The part that actually hurt, the part one had to sit with in my kitchen alone at 11 o'clock at night more than once, was my children. I called my daughter 4 days after the party. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply asked her calmly how long she had known. There was a silence on the phone that told me everything before she said a single word. She eventually admitted that yes, she had known for months, that she and her brother had discussed it, that they had decided not to tell me because, and she actually said this, "We didn't want to stress you out before your retirement, Mom. We thought it would be easier to just let it happen and let you add just after." Easier for whom? I wanted to ask her. Easier for whom? I want to pause here and ask you something because I think about this a lot. If you've ever had people you love decide on your behalf that you were too fragile to handle the truth, while they quietly built a plan around your back, type "I understand" in the comments, because I think a lot of you know exactly what that particular kind of loneliness feels like. It is not the same as being betrayed by a stranger. It is worse because it comes with the added insult of being underestimated by the very people who are supposed to know your strength better than anyone else alive. I did not scream at my children. I did not cut them off dramatically or make declarations. I simply told my daughter quietly, "You'll understand soon enough why I'm not going to discuss the details of this with either of you right now," and I hung up the phone. Then I got back to work because work, it turned out, was the thing that was going to save me. Over the following 3 weeks, Ms. Coleman and I built a case that Craig never saw coming, precisely because he had never once respected me enough to imagine I could build it. We documented the hidden transfers. We documented the condo down payment made with joint funds 9 months before he filed. We documented that my full pension, vested the week of my retirement, was subject to equitable division under state law regardless of whose name it was in, and that Craig's attempt to time the divorce around my retirement date, rather than protecting his interests, had actually created a paper trail proving premeditation, which mattered enormously once we moved from simple asset division into questions of financial misconduct during the marriage. We also did something Craig never anticipated. Ms. Coleman filed for a temporary restraining order on our joint accounts within the first week. The moment Ruth's early findings showed a pattern of transfers. That single filing froze roughly $240,000 in shared assets before Craig could move another cent. He found out about the freeze the way most overconfident people find out they've lost control of a situation, by having his card declined at a hardware store while trying to buy paint for his new condo. By day 18, Craig's attorney called Ms. Coleman requesting a settlement meeting. By day 23, the tone of every email from his side had changed completely, from confident and dismissive to something that read, unmistakably, like fear. By day 28, I received a phone call from my son, his voice tight in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught in a lie. He said, "Mom, Dad's a mess. He didn't think you'd actually fight this. He thought you'd just let it happen." That was always the miscalculation, wasn't it? Everyone in that banquet room, everyone who clapped, everyone who assumed I would quietly disappear into some sad, diminished version of retirement, they had all made the same mistake. They mistook my calm for weakness. They mistook 31 years of professional discipline for passivity. They forgot, or perhaps never actually knew, that the woman who spent 3 decades finding the exact place where an agreement didn't say what people assumed it said, was never going to simply nod along when it was her own life on the line. On day 30, I sat across a conference table from Craig for the first time since the party. He looked smaller than I remembered him, which I know sounds like something out of a movie, but it was simply true. The confidence that had let him hand me divorce papers in front of 200 people was entirely gone. In its place was a man who had just learned that the joint accounts were frozen, that the condo purchase was being challenged as a fraudulent transfer of marital assets, that his relationship with the woman from the conference had been fully documented with dates that lined up precisely with hotel receipts Ruth had pulled, and that my attorney intended to use every bit of it not to punish him out of spite, but simply to ensure I received exactly what 31 years of my labor and 36 years of my marriage had actually earned me. He asked quietly, almost pleadingly, whether there was any way to handle this privately without dragging it out. My daughter, sitting 2 seats down from him because she had insisted on being there, would not meet my eyes. My son sat beside her, jaw tight, saying nothing. I told Craig the same thing I had told him 30 days earlier, except this time I said it out loud, for everyone in that room to hear, the way he had once done to me. I said, "You wanted a scene in front of witnesses. I gave you privacy. That was more grace than you gave me. We settled that week. I kept my full pension. I kept the house free and clear, with Craig's share of the equity going toward my legal costs and a portion of the frozen joint funds. He kept the condo, minus the down payment he'd taken from our marriage, which came back to me as part of the settlement. It was not petty. It was not vengeful. It was simply what I was owed, calculated the exact way I had calculated other people's claims for 31 years, carefully, patiently, and without a single wasted word. As for my children, that relationship is still being rebuilt slowly on my terms this time, not theirs. My daughter has apologized more than once, and I believe some of it. My son took longer to understand what he'd actually been part of. I love them both. I always will. But I no longer assume the way I once did that love automatically comes with loyalty. I learned that the hard way on a stage in a navy dress in front of 200 people who clapped. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, from an old woman who thought she knew exactly how her story was going to end, it's this: being underestimated is not a weakness. It is, if you let it be, the single greatest advantage you will ever have. Nobody sees you coming. Nobody prepares for the quiet ones. And by the time they realize what you're capable of, it is already far, far too late for them to stop it. If you made it this far with me tonight, I want to hear from you. Tell me your age, tell me where you're watching from, and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? Hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one, because I have plenty more where this came from, and I promise you, some of them are even harder to believe than mine. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never, ever mistake someone's silence for surrender.